to see. But where you see the little green dots, that's an overlay. So there's one at the top of the page just south of Richland Park. And then if you look down towards the bottom, there's one that's just 2 blocks. That's the Bowling House District. That's Nebraska and Colorado, not roughly, but directly between 46th and 45th Avenue North. And historic zoning, it's sort of like, or any type of zoning, it's sort of like a layered cake. On the bottom, on the base of the cake, you have the base zoning. That usually entails how a property can be used, like if it's residential or commercial. And then over top of that, you have your overlay, which in this case are different types of historic overlays that provide some extra review process and some extra protection. Once an overlay is established and you wanted to do something new to your house or different, you could, and I'm not sure what that means. Alice Kelly's requesting to annotate the shared content.
I'm not seeing that. Robin, was that something that popped up on your page?
It is.
Okay.
I'm not sure what it is. So anyway, so if you're wanting to do something on the exterior of your property, the process is to apply, and the staff is there to help you to determine whether or not it meets the design guidelines. And then some projects go to the commission, like all infill, all brand new full homes will go to the commission. And then some projects, like some outbuildings, maybe some simple additions, could get administrative approval, which means we can get you a permit pretty quickly. Sorry, now it's no longer working. Oh, there we go. So again, we really encourage people who are in historic overlays to come to us early in the process. Let us help you through meeting those design guidelines, tweaking your design so that when you go to the commission, you're pretty much assured you'll get approval. So for all of those 5 different historic overlays I talked about, we will review new construction. So that's anything that's new construction, right? So a new porch, a new addition, a new outbuilding, that type of thing. We also review demolition, both in whole and in part. So maybe you want to demolish a non-historic house, or maybe you want to demolish an existing rear addition on a house that really doesn't contribute to the historic character. Maybe you want to demo an outbuilding. Those are all the things that are reviewed. And then also moving of a building. And this doesn't happen very much. I think we've maybe had one in 10 or 11 years. But this is like physically picking up and moving a building within the district, out of the district, or in a different building into the district. That will be reviewed. So the difference between the neighborhood conservation and that more restrictive historic preservation is that there's an additional thing we would review in the historic preservation. Again, what you already have in Sylvan Park are 2 neighborhood conservation. But in that stricter one, we'll review any other type of exterior change, like replacement roofing, fencing, a driveway, replacement windows, that type of thing, that we would not review in neighborhood conservation. So playing on that a little bit, here are the things we don't do. In a neighborhood conservation district, we don't review new refacing of driveways. We don't review walls or fences. We don't review replacement windows or replacement roofing material. We don't review landscaping. We don't review the loss of old growth trees. And I put that in there because I know that's often a concern of people, especially with new construction, is the loss of those trees. But it's not something that the historic overlay has the authority to review. We don't review stormwater issues, which I know is often a concern of neighborhoods with all the new construction going on. And we don't review those small outbuildings that you can usually get at Home Depot or Lowe's if they're less than 100 square feet. I don't believe codes reviews them as either. And we don't review public art. And this is something that I've seen more in Woodland and Waverly, where they'll have art actually in the front yard. That's not something that we review. And again, we don't review interior work. So any work you want to do in the interior, we're not going to review it. That would just be a codes permit. And we don't review paint color. So if you want to paint your house pink with purple polka dots, you can do that. We're not going to review that. We highly recommend that you don't paint masonry because of the maintenance issues and trapping of moisture, but we're not going to review the code. We don't require that you hire an architect to do your work if you're doing an addition or an infill. And we don't require new construction to mimic historic buildings. It can have a new contemporary look. What we're really trying to get is make sure that the massing scale is appropriate and that overall form is appropriate. And then from there, it can be a style that's more contemporary if that's what the property owner wants. And we don't fully deny demolition. Excuse me. Certainly buildings that are non-contributing, that are not historic, those can be demolished. But then we also occasionally allow for historic buildings to be demolished if they're just completely beyond repair. And that does happen. Park and Elkins had one just fairly recently, in the last 6 months or so. Now the process, if it's something that you decide is something that your neighborhood wants to look at, we would recommend another community meeting where we could go into more depth on the types of things that are reviewed and not reviewed, the kinds of projects that meet the guidelines. And this is 100% neighborhood driven. So this is not something that Metro government imposes on people. All the overlays, it's something where we've been invited in to talk to the neighborhoods, to talk about it. And it's the neighborhoods who really decide and let their council member know if this is something that they want or not. So here you see some of the people that worked very hard to get the overlays in their neighborhoods. And next we'll do an architectural resource survey. And what I mean by this is first we want to make sure, right, that the area qualifies. We can't do a historic overlay if it doesn't qualify as historic. So one thing we'll do is we'll just go house to house, building to building. We'll get photographs. We'll capture information about the overall style and form. We'll do research on the history of the area and determine if it qualifies. And that information is also used to tweak the design guidelines in case there's something really specific for your neighborhood that needs to be included. And then if it's something, again, you decide you want, you've had several community meetings, at least one, and most people are on board and they think it's useful to them, then you go from those community meetings to public hearings, a more formal process. This is when the council member actually files. So you'll have a public hearing with the Metro Historic Zoning Commission, just to confirm again that it qualifies. You'll have a public hearing with the Planning Commission to make sure it meets the community plan. And then from there, there'll be 3 readings, one of them being a public hearing with council. The final decision is made by council. And again, that's it. That's just a real brief overview, just to give you an idea.
Robin, I think you got muted towards the end of that after you said that was a brief overview.
I just was checking to see if anyone had any questions or if you preferred to ask questions at the end.
Robin, can you speak a little bit to where we have, so currently we have Park and Elkins overlay, and that covers, do you know off the top of your head, I think it's 42nd all the way down to, what's the other end of it, the western end of it?
Let me pull that up again real quick so I can make sure I'm telling you correctly. It's 42nd to 51st.
Okay. And then the other one that that we passed, it seems like forever ago. It was last term. So it was like maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago. That covers Colorado and Nebraska, right?
Right. Between
and
45th and
go ahead.
Yes, between 45th and 46th.
Okay. And so what I've been contacted about from a lot of neighbors around that second overlay we were talking about is the bowling house overlay. And what is ideal is if new overlays connect to the existing overlay, that way we already have guidelines that we can look at, and it makes more sense than having kind of a patchwork quilt of overlays throughout the area if that's what neighbors want. But what I've been committed to and have done along the way is really overlays. I feel like need to be, as Robin described, they need to be kind of neighborhood led. Neighbors need to come to me after talking to their fellow neighbors on their block, and I'm happy to look at zoning and overlays on a block to block basis. So Robin, could you tell us, are there many differences between the Park and Elkins overlay and the bowling house overlay?
No, there's really not. Both of those are in what we now call the consolidated design guidelines. Most of the neighborhood conservation overlays are all in one because their guidelines were so similar. And so it just makes it easier on applicants if they have that one base. But then every single district has its own chapter. So if there was something about the bowling house district that was radically different and needed to be addressed in the guidelines, we could do that in that specific chapter.
And remind me, because sometimes I get the overlays confused if I haven't looked at them recently. In District 24 in our council district, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have about 5 or 6 overlays, I think. Now, and I think, as you mentioned before, they can be a little bit personalized. Is there any personalization? I know that like some overlays maybe allow dormers where others don't. Do we have any of those kind of personalizational things in the Sylvan Park overlays?
We don't.
And then can you also address, because I know this is a question that we've gotten often when we've done these presentations, is if somebody has a one-story house and it is a contributing historic home, what is the likelihood of them being able to add an additional story or 2 stories onto that?
Not great. The idea is for new construction not to overwhelm a historic house. So for the most part, additions should be at the back. They should be no wider and no taller than the historic home. They shouldn't more than double the footprint. Now, one question you threw in there, and we get this a lot too, is can I just cut the roof off and put a whole nother story on top? No, not with the conservation or the historic overlays. That may be that may be a reason that people prefer the contextual overlay over conservation.
And so, Robin, I often characterize the conservation overlay as basically the front of your home is really what we're trying to preserve, that character of the front of the home from the street. And that's why y'all prefer any additions kind of tucked behind that view from the street. Is that a good characterization in summary? Or is there anything you'd like to kind of add to that?
Yeah, I will add to that just one little thing, because often when we say front, sometimes people think that all they need to keep is the front wall. So I want to make sure we don't think that's the case. We're really trying to keep the historic building. But yes, they weigh work differently. So if it's in the back, they're going to weigh it less critically, the commission, than something that's going to be up front. So if you have a historic front porch, probably not going to be able to change that. You have a rear porch, even if it's historic, you're probably going to be able to change that.
And then I also wanted to touch on, I'm going to kind of go over the zoning in Sylvan Park in a minute, but I know that in our historic overlays, even though we have setbacks in the code, sometimes, especially in our historic neighborhoods like Sylvan Park, Richland West End, and so on and so forth, homes are not always, they were built before setbacks existed, right? Our standard setbacks. So, so I think y'all have had cases before you where setbacks are sometimes not the standard because you're matching a historic setback. Is that correct? Or it's kind of like a home is going to have to come into compliance with the overlay. They get more wiggle room if they're out of compliance with setbacks. Is that correct?
Yes, it could be, because the way that the code is written, the Historic Commission decides what the setbacks are. So in a way, those bulk standards don't even exist once there's a historic overlay. But the commission does consider that, as a starting point. So I just wanted to make that clear, because often it's considered a variance, but if you're in the overlay, it's not a variance. It's just another thing that the commission considers, which means if you need to change what a the base zoning would have required. You don't have to go to the BZA and you don't have to pay that application fee.
And so one more thing, Robin, as I transition to talking about our general zoning in Sylvan Park, I would say about 98%, 99% of Sylvan Park is all zoned RS 7.5. So that means it's single family homes on 7,500 square foot lots. And some questions that I've received recently is about DADUs, detached accessory dwelling units. And how that plays with conservation overlays. So Robin, if we are single family zone properties and we go into an overlay, can the commission approve a second, a dadu or a garage apartment that would make it a 2-family lot rather than a 1-family lot?
They cannot, because they don't do land use. So they might approve the design of an outbuilding, but how that building can be used, how many units can be in it, if any units can be in it, that is not their role.
Okay. All right. Well, Robin, if you'll stay with us and we'll go to questions in a little bit. Let me talk a little bit and back up some, which probably should have done before I had you start, Robin. But so wanting to talk about Sylvan Park in general real quick. So as I just mentioned, the vast majority of Sylvan Park is zoned single family. So that's 1 unit per lot. I think y'all are probably all aware of the homes on Utah that are 2 homes are going up where even though it's single family zoned. That's because of non-conforming uses. We have a number of duplexes still scattered about in Sylvan Park. And so if they can prove, the property owner can prove that they still were being used as a duplex, that's how some of those duplexes kind of pop up and exist. But they do have to provide evidence to codes that they were duplexes prior to being used as that, to be able to permit and kind of split into 2 homes. So Sylvan Park is also in the urban zoning overlay that was put in place in around 2000. What the urban zoning overlay does is it was meant to kind of preserve the old character of the urban core of the 1950s urban core. That's where most of the urban zoning overlay is covered in Davidson County. And it has things, it does change the height that you can build your homes. So a home can go up to 45 feet in the urban zoning overlay. Whereas where I live over off of White Bridge Road, kind of at White Bridge in Charlotte. We're outside of the urban zoning overlay. So if somebody was building a new home in my neighborhood, they could go up to 3 stories, but it's not limited on the height side. Whereas in Sylvan Park, it is limited to 3 stories and 45 feet. So, but there's some pluses and minuses with that. Obviously, we're going to get a little bit more taller homes in Sylvan Park than we would in like the White Ridge Road area. But you're also more likely to trigger sidewalks because you're in the urban zoning overlay. That changes some of those triggers and calculations there. So with the RS 7.5 that almost all of Sylvan Park is in, that gives you a 5-foot setback on either side of your house. If you were to max out your setbacks, you could go to 5 feet on either side of your property line. It is 20 feet in the rear that you need to have a rear setback. And then your front setback is set contextually on your block face. They average the setback of the homes there, and that's how you find your front setback for that. The land use policy for Sylvan Park is T3 neighborhood maintenance. And I'm going to, in a minute, I'm going to copy and paste some links into the chat that you can use. I also have them on my Facebook page that you can go to read more about our land use policy of T3 neighborhood maintenance, more about the urban zoning overlay and things like that. So I wanted to just talk about a contextual overlay and explain what that is, because I've had several questions about that as well. So let me pull this up real quick. So I am going to try to drop the link into the chat so you can, this is a fact sheet about contextual overlays. And I'm just going to go over it real quick. So contextual overlay, similar to what we were just talking about with the conservation overlay, that base zoning of RS 7.5 remains the same, so that doesn't change. Generally, the contextual overlay includes appropriate design standards necessary to maintain and reinforce established form or character of the residential development in the area. So what that does is it starts to average the setbacks, your height, the coverage of your lot, like how much square footage you have, and then access, garages, and parking. So that's what the difference between the conservation overlay, which is more about design guidelines and touching on other things that Robin talked about. The contextual overlay is more about size than the design and aesthetics of a home. So the setback is basically your setbacks and your heights are average of what is on your block. So for example, if the average height on your block is 24 feet tall, then your maximum height is going to be allowed at 30 feet tall. And so that's where you kind of start to control the scale and the massing of the homes on the block through the contextual overlay. Again, you could get a very modern home in the middle of Cape Cods or Craftsman still, but you're going to be able to control the size of it. And so this is really great if you're potentially like the smallest home on your lot, or I'm sorry, on your block. But if you're the biggest home on your lot, it's not as favorable to you because you are limited in how much bigger you can get. So the lot coverage, for example, is, let's see here, the example they give is average coverage of the abutting lots around you, say is 2,100 square feet, then your maximum coverage is going to be 3,150. 3,150 square feet would be allowed. So it's typically what is surrounding you, and then you can go a little bit above that. Some benefits that I have found and neighbors have liked about the contextual overlay is that it does mandate that if there's an alley, which most of Sylvan Park does have alley access, access is from the alley. Corner lots can have some other access options. And then it also says that the front of any detached garage shall be located behind the rear of the primary structure. And the garage door of any attached garage shall face the side or rear property line. And so what's important there is I know that a lot of people have, they don't care for garages on the front of the home. Also, that's because it requires usually much more of a driveway, drive aisle that is a lot of concrete. And so that is a benefit that a lot of people see when it comes to access to the lot and to the garage. So that's kind of a brief overview of the contextual overlay. I've dropped that fact sheet PDF link into the chat box. And if y'all want to just start dropping in your questions about the conservation overlay, let's do that first. And then we could switch to questions about the contextual overlay. Some of which I may be able to answer, some of which I might have to copy and ask codes to get back to us. But so does anyone have questions about the conservation overlay? Well, while y'all are typing in questions, let me go back to talk about process. So as Robin talked about, this begins with a neighborhood community meeting, which I'm likely to hold, and I am holding a zoning 101, just kind of the basics of zoning in July. That date has not been set yet. And then since we have a lot of interest for conservation overlays on Utah Avenue and Nebraska, we'll have another one of these meetings and go more in depth in July as well. But so the process is we have that community meeting. We start gathering the position of your neighbors, whether they're for or against, or whether they still have questions. We go through that process, and I would apply as the applicant to historic. And the process is that we have the public hearing at Historic Commission. The Historic Zoning Commission makes a recommendation. It then goes to the Planning Commission, where the Planning Commission has a public hearing and makes a recommendation to the council. And then we have another public hearing at the council, and the council votes on it from there. Similarly, with a contextual overlay, I would apply as the applicant on behalf of the neighbors. It does not go to historic. It does go through planning and then go through the council. Again, a public hearing is held at the Planning Commission and at the council. Right now, because of timing and things, if I were to file anything, it would probably be in the next couple weeks. And I think we calculated this out, and I meant to pull it up, but it would probably be about October before we were heard at one of the commissions, I think. So one of the questions is, would the new 4305 construction be permitted if located in the bowling overlay? So I'm assuming that would be 4305 Utah. Is that correct, Bob? If you'll type that in to clarify. And so, Robin, I believe if we're talking about 4305 Utah, yes, we are. So those are very modern style homes that replaced non-conforming use duplexes. They were single story brick duplexes, kind of your standard that you see around Nashville, that just front back duplexes. So they would probably be considered non-contributing by y'all's standards. And now it's a very modern, very tall, non-craftsman, not what you see in the bulk of Sylvan Park or in the overlays. Do you think that would be something that y'all would permit as a new construction?
I apologize, I haven't seen it, so I couldn't say.
Okay. I'm going to go on a limb and say that y'all would probably have a lot of feedback on it. And what I'm happy to do is, before we have another meeting, Robin, I'll make sure to send you the images if they are not up yet, so you know about them. So another question is, what would be the process? What would the process look like for an addition on an existing detached garage? So I don't think that's something you review, Robin. Is that correct?
Yes, if a garage has an addition, it would be considered new construction, and it would be something we would review. And so again, it may be something that could be administratively reviewed and you could get a permit right away, or it might be something that goes to the commission. The commission meets the third Wednesday of every month, and they will make a decision at that meeting, either to approve or disapprove or approve with conditions. So you're not going to be deferred endlessly for months and months and months. They're going to, unless you want to be, if the applicant wants to defer, that's fine, but the commission's going to make some kind of decision when something's on the agenda.
And so, just to kind of give a little more detail on that, so if you are in a overlay, a conservation overlay or historic overlay, that permit process includes Robin's team at historic. If you are in a contextual overlay or not an overlay at all, you simply go to codes. It does not go through historic. Now, backing up again, if you're in that overlay and you're going through historic, you don't have to go onto the Planning Commission. It's historic, takes it from there. The only time that we have this like 2-tier, 3-tiered process is when we're first establishing overlays. And so the question is, to clarify, have I submitted an application? No, I have not. It was important for us to have this meeting tonight, and neighbors have been canvassing around. And so Adam Wakefield, who is on this call, has sent me kind of their progress update and a map. I love colored maps, as y'all will learn. If you've ever seen me present at a historic or at the Planning Commission for these, I color coordinate them. And so based off of that support map, we'll draw up an application and file it, and I can send it out via email, through my email blast, and through other things. And one thing that is important to note here is that overlays can be submitted kind of for a broader area and then narrowed down. But once I submit that application, we can't like add 5 more blocks. Isn't that right, Robin?
That's correct.
Okay. And then also, Robin, remind me, like our goal, I kind of mentioned it earlier, is our goal is to have overlays touch each other. So they kind of match up and link up because if, say for example, we don't have, if we were playing Tetris and we cannot connect to the bowling house or Park and Elkin, say it's 5 blocks away, would y'all make a new overlay for that, or could it be like an annex portion of one of the existing overlays?
Yes, if it's not contiguous, it would need to be a new overlay. And you're absolutely right that it helps to have it all be together, because what we did with the bowling house district, it's just 2 blocks, and it's not, I'm not going to say it's worthless, but it doesn't do as much as a larger area can do for the neighborhood overall. You know, if you're in this one little block and you're following the guidelines, but no one around you is, and it's all coming down for 3-story buildings, it has less value for the neighborhood overall. So a little bit more that you can get, the better. And I'll jump in, if I could, and explain or tell you what I think is the number one question. Because if you're thinking about conservation or contextual, you know, which one is best for the neighborhood? The number one question to ask yourself is, are you okay with existing buildings being demolished and you really just want to review new construction? That would be contextual. Or do you want to conserve? Do you want to keep the existing buildings for the most part and control new construction? So that's the main question I think everyone needs to ask themselves.
No, Robin, that's a good point. Thank you for bringing that up, because what I failed to mention is one of the differences is that under the contextual overlay, demolitions are not reviewed, where they are under the conservation. So that is one of the big differences between the two that have been asked about. So following up on this question of when would the overlay take effect, the date of application or the date of third reading at council. So traditionally, I have filed the application and filed the bill at the council kind of at the same time or in tandem. That way we can reduce the amount of having to print signs and letters and postage and things. And so traditionally, the way that pending legislative doctrine works is once we have a recommendation from the Planning Commission and it is past second reading at the council, then it's considered pending. So any permits in conflict with that legislation would not be issued. It would not take full effect. It would not be, you know, final until after the third reading of the council and signature by the mayor, usually a day or 2 later. But typically after second reading is when it's considered pending legislation and kind of puts a pause on other things. So the other question is, how can a home be excluded from the overlay? So as Robin talked about, they really need to be contiguous. And so typically we do not do a patchwork quilt of overlays. It's a little bit of an all or nothing on your block face. And I typically weigh that decision based on the feedback I've received through, I put out a Google survey typically because it's easy to keep track of everything there. I like to see a certain percentage of participation from the neighbors that are being kind of polled and expressing their opinion on a block. And that really varies based on how many homes are on the block. And then from there, how much support or opposition is there is kind of how I gauge it out. There's no hard and fast ratio or rubric there. It is because there will be some blocks that have 4 homes and some blocks that have 8 homes or 12 homes. And so, Robin, that brings up another question too about if one side of the street wants the overlay, can one side of the street have it but not the other side of the street? So if we're on the 400, say the 4,500 block of you know, Nashville Avenue, and the evens want it but the odds don't want it, how does the commission look at that?
We don't recommend it because, again, it doesn't seem to be quite fair if half of the street's following the guidelines and they're looking right across the street and that side doesn't. So we do really recommend that it be a broader area that's following the guidelines to really have meaning.
Great, thank you. All right, so we have a question about horizontal property regimes. It seems like developers are using those to get around the zoning. So what that is a horizontal property regime is typically what a detached duplex usually becomes. So we have kind of an odd thing in Nashville that not a lot of other cities have, is we allow duplexes to separate. And so really a horizontal property regime, or you'll hear them referred to as HPRs, those are simply like detached duplexes. And so if you remember, probably 10, 15 years ago, the duplexes had to be still attached in some way, and it led to like this awkward umbilical cord thing where like people would have like attached laundry rooms or whatever. The previous councils got rid of that. And so this horizontal property regime is where you take a duplex and you separate them out. Because Sylvan Park is zoned single family, the only way a horizontal property regime or the detached duplexes would be allowed is if they were a non-conforming use. If they were able to prove that they have been a duplex for a certain amount of time through certain ways, then they are able to retain those existing property rights to stay a duplex or a two-family home. So I think this was a little bit more. Let's see here, Kendall. What do you say? Okay, so the question about is about decision who decides what is historically significant. Is it age only? Are there published standards used to determine this? So Robin, I'm going to let you do this one because it is much more your domain than I can always keep track of.
Sure. We follow the National Register criteria, and it's not just age. We're also looking at integrity, and by that I mean its physical integrity. How much of its historic character does it still have? For instance, if someone's replaced all the windows and doors, that's still going to be considered a historic building. But if someone has come along and they've taken the roof off and they've added a whole second level, like some of those pictures I showed, then that building would no longer be historic. So we're looking at the age of construction as defined by the development of the neighborhood. We're looking at its history, and we're looking at its integrity.
And so Robin, let me, I'm going to explain this and then I want you to correct me because I think I've explained this correct before, but I'm not sure if I ask the question right, I'll get the answer that I'm trying to express. So if I live on 2300, the 2300 block of Nashville Avenue, again, I'm making these addresses up so no one feels targeted in any way, but so I live on the 2300 block of Nashville Avenue, and my home is not a contributing historic home. I'm not considered historic. I was built in the 80s, and I have, odd things there. I don't know, an 80s home style ranch or something. The overlay is still on my property if our block is in the overlay. The overlay still applies to my home, even though my house is not contributing. How does that play out at the commission if I want to demo and build new, or if I want to add on to my 80s style home that's in an overlay?
You're exactly right. It's still in the overlay, even though it may not be historic. So you could either demolish it without much problem and then build a new house that met the guidelines, or you can make changes to your existing house in a way that's appropriate for the historic character of the district. So those people who have historic homes, any change they make really should be appropriate for the historic character of their particular house. But if you don't have a historic house, then we're really just going to be looking at the overall district as our context.
Robin, something I hear y'all say a lot at historic, and it's I think alluded to or probably written out in some of the overlay documents. It talks about that if you're like building a new home, you don't want us to like build like a a 1920s home, like
Right.
going out and getting 1920s doors and nails and all of that. It has to be you're not going to hold us to building an exact historic home, right? Like, could you expand on that a little bit more?
Yes, you're absolutely right. So the guidelines are based on something called the Secretary of Interior Standards, which were developed by the National Park Service. And part of that says that new construction should really be of its own time. It should really reflect its own time. It's not about copying historic buildings. That kind of takes away from the historic character of the district if you're just doing these kind of fake Disney-fied replicas. So that is something the guidelines are really going to look for, is something that speaks of its own time. Now, a lot of people don't want to go too far afield. They want something that is pretty similar to a Foursquare or a Craftsman or whatever is in that particular neighborhood, and that's fine too. But if you wanted to do something a little more contemporary, again, as long as that massing and scale meets the context of the neighborhood, that could be done.
Great, thank you. So I'm not seeing any other questions put in the chat box. I'll give y'all another minute or two to put any questions you have in there about contextual overlays or about the conservation overlay. We'll give it another minute or two. And so Robin, if I wanted to go see we just got a big one. I'll come to that one. So Robin, if I wanted to go see like what Bowling House and Park and Elkins has now, what would be the best way to Google or find it on your website?
It's at nashville.gov, and the actual page, as you might imagine, the link's a little long, so I can't give you that over the phone. But if you go to nashville.gov and you look for the neighborhood conservation guidelines, it should take you right there. There's a little search engine at the top of nashville.gov. And what you're going to be looking for is the consolidated guidelines for neighborhood conservation for turn of the century districts. And there you'll see, I think it's 19 overlays, 2 of them being the 2 that you already have in Sylvan Park. So that will give you the framework of what the guidelines say right now.
Great, thank you. And so one of the questions, let's see here, if in a conservation overlay, it sounds like it would be okay with having talking about duplexes being extended. So yes, so like currently on Utah, where there were 2 duplexes next door to each other, and now there's going to be 4 detached homes, where before it was 4 attached duplexes, well, 2 duplexes, 2 units each. That would still exist because this does not, none of the overlays that we're discussing changes that base zoning. So if you have existing property rights as a duplex, then you can retain those as long as you can prove and provide documentation to codes that you had 2 units in use. So let's see here, this leaves height. Okay, so yes, again, in the urban zoning overlay that's over Sylvan Park, does allow 3 stories and 45 feet. So Lindsay's asking about why we're just talking about Utah and such right now. That's because that was the kind of start of this conversation that led to this community meeting tonight. And I know that those streets have already been canvassed, and that's who we were kind of targeting because they're closest to the Bowling House. Obviously, if there are other streets that are interested, I need to hear from those constituents and neighbors, and we can start talking about how expansive this overlay needs to be. So Jennifer's asking what percentage of the block is required to pass either historic or contextual overlay. As I mentioned before, it really is kind of a judgment call based on how many people have participated in the survey, how many homes are on the block, and that type of thing. So that's kind of how I gauge the support or opposition of an overlay on a block and decide what I'm going to apply for to take to historic or take to planning for a contextual or a conservation overlay. And so just to be kind of clear again, we are talking about conservation overlay, not historic overlay. And then also some neighbors have reached out about contextual. Robin, do you want to fill in there some too?
I just wanted to fill in a different aspect of that. And the question, I think, was about what you said, it's about how much support do you need? But for a neighborhood conservation zoning overlay, we also need for there to be a certain amount of historic properties in there. So we're looking at least 60% or so to be historic. So I know that there was a call I had recently on the southern end, and they just didn't have enough historic buildings, and they really just don't qualify. So that's a question we would have to answer too for anyone who thinks they might want to be in. You know, give me a call. Let me kind of pull up some pictures, see what your specific area has, and that may be a deciding factor for you as well.
Great, thank you, Robin. So block captains are kind of self-appointed who is talking to their neighbors. As I mentioned before, Adam Wakefield, who is on here. Adam, if you don't mind, do you mind dropping your email address into the chat box so people can find out if y'all already have block captains on their street? If not, y'all can email me and I can help connect you that way. But I do not know the block captains. Thank you, Adam. I appreciate it. I don't have all the block captains because that's a little bit more of the grassroots preparation before it gets to me. So for all the non-conforming properties where developers can split land, how do we stop them from building 4 properties in the height and style without out of line with the neighborhood? So first, if it is a non-conforming property, meaning that it's not a single family home, then we're going to have to take those on a case-by-case basis because they're zone single family. A zone change is not going to take away their non-conforming use rights as a duplex if they have continued to use that as a duplex and can show that. So how do we stop 4 properties and the height and style being out of character with the neighborhood? So height can be addressed both through the conservation and the contextual, but style is more of the conservation overlay. That's how you're gonna keep the homes in similar styles. A contextual overlay is not going to do that because it does not have the design guidelines the way a conservation does. So, sorry, the chat box keeps jumping around on me. How does already having 3 stories on a home affect the contextual overlay? This would allow for homes to be built higher, correct? So if you already have a 3-story home on your lot, or I'm sorry, on your block, then that does mean that you are likely to have other 3-story homes on your block, but they will not be able to go over 45 feet. So if you have a home on your block, sorry, keep swapping that up. If you already have a 45-foot tall home on your block, they can't go, even under contextual, you can't go over 45 feet. That is in the code. So, but it is an averaged out amount of what is on the street. So, moving down with conservation, this would cover style and height. Yes. What was the height limit before the UZO was put in place? So areas that are not in the urban zoning overlay, like myself, I live White Bridge and Charlotte area, and the district goes over into Hillwood as well. So in that area outside of the urban zoning overlay, we are limited to 3 stories. There's not a height number attached to that, but it is 3 stories. So without the UZO, it is 3 stories. With the UZO, it is 3 stories, no taller than 45 feet. So like where I live, I could get a 3-story home that is 50 or 60 feet, but it can't go over 3 stories. So any other, we are at 6:52. I'm going to go ahead and put my email in the chat box as well in case you don't have it. Please feel free to email me questions from here. Robin, would it be best for them to send the questions about, thank you, perfect, yes. So Robin's put the Historic Commission email in the chat box as well, because most often if you send me a kind of more specific question about the overlay, conservation overlay, I'm just going to send you to Robin. So you feel free to go directly to Robin on that. And so with that, we will just start to wrap up. Robin, is there anything else you feel we need to add that maybe we didn't go over in detail or should make sure we have in here?
I think that's a good overview.
Okay, great. And so next steps will be the Zoning 101 meeting in July, which I'll get an email out. And then we'll do another overlay meeting about conservation or contextual based on the feedback that I've received over the next couple weeks and in the past on these already. And so thank you all for attending tonight. I appreciate it. I hope this has given you a good overview and some resources. And I look forward to meeting with y'all again soon. So I'm going to attempt to hand this back to Rosie, our in the council office, which doesn't always happen correctly, but thank you all for attending tonight.